and Jason, are you ready to proceed? Well, thank you, everybody. We're here to talk about the Downtown Infrastructure Design Project. My name is Rob Owen. I'm Public Works Director. Just introduce our crew here in the council chambers. We've got Annie Meredith, who's running our meeting for us, Vice Mayor Watkins, Jack Plonte, and Burley Hambrick. We'll also be joined by Dick Yano and Jason Harrington, who are the project consultants on this project. So just a little outline of what we got planned for you tonight. I'll turn it over to Dick Yano and Jason here in a minute. They'll go through kind of a project summary. We'll review some of the questions that we've received on the project website to date. We'll take any new comments or questions that anyone may have, and then we'll kind of outline the next steps for the project. So with that, I would turn it over to you, Dick.
Thanks, Rob. So the purpose of this meeting is basically to obtain feedback on design concepts that were presented on the project website. There was a video that we taped showing the concepts. So hopefully many of you have had an opportunity to look at that, and we'll provide us some feedback tonight. I'll go through and do a quick project overview. Then we'll go over some of the questions and responses that we've received to date, including the stakeholder meeting that we had last Wednesday. And then we'll entertain any new questions that come up tonight and respond to those, and we'll talk about the next steps as far as the project goes. So just a quick overview. The project is along Beale Street between 1st and 6th Street, and it extends north of Beale Street, a half a block to the alley, and then it extends south to Route 66, Andy Devine there, as shown in red here. So that's basically the limits of what the proposed improvements are including. So with that, I'll go through and walk through some of the questions we received to date and our responses to it, including some of the discussion we had last week at our stakeholder meeting. So there was a question about bicycle lanes along Beale Street and bicycle parking. We did show some of bicycle parking on our concepts. We did not show a separate bike lane, which is typical of this type of a facility that is low speed, low volume. We typically would not show a separate bike lane. We would allow the bicycles to travel with the traffic, and we could provide pavement markings called sharrows, which basically indicate that the bicycles are sharing the street with the vehicles, and it's usually a better solution for low speed facilities like this. Moving down to some other questions. There was a question about the money budgeted for the project and when it might actually happen. And currently there's only money budgeted for the design of the project. The city has provided that funding to design the project, and they will be seeking funding for the construction as soon as they can to move into construction after the design is complete. There was also a question about some of the other downtown areas that we've looked at. We highlighted Prescott, Williams, and Bend, Oregon, but there was a question about the Green Valley Ranch Street in Henderson, and we have looked at that virtually as far as some of the improvements there, and we would look at opportunities to incorporate some of those features into what might be applicable to Beale Street. This next question is related to the connections with US 93, I-40, Route 66, as far as how all those connect together. We will be incorporating wayfinding with this project to connect Route 66 to Beale Street. As far as beyond that, it's not currently included in the project. To connect with US 93 and I-40 is beyond the scope of this project, but could potentially be evaluated as part of a separate project. The next question was related to some of the landscaping and, native species, that type of thing. We would look for finding the appropriate landscape to incorporate into the project. And we'll also look at ways to connect with some of the trails around there. So we want to gain more information about that and a potential loop system, which Rob, I believe last week you had touched on that maybe there is more of a plan for that type system to connect all those together.
Yeah, that's right, Dick. The Parks Department is working on an update of their parks and trails plan. And I know there's been discussion on the possibility of connecting some of the existing trails off of Fort Beale and in the White Cliffs area. So I know that's something that the Parks Department is studying, and that we'll definitely be including them in this project. And kind of going back to your discussion on tree selection, we'll be including our park staff in that process also.
Thank you. There was a question about electric charging stations, and that has been discussed quite a bit with this project as far as being able to accommodate that, if not with the project, to provide provisions and infrastructure to be able to add that in the future. We just need to determine kind of what the demand would be, and if so, what locations would be best for that. But we would look at least providing the infrastructure improvements to allow that to happen, if not now, in the future. There was a question about asbestos and other environmental consulting related to the project. And currently, we do not think there will be a need for that type of work as part of the project. We're not planning on touching any of the buildings adjacent to the street and sidewalk, which would typically be where you'd get into some asbestos and that type of thing. The next question was about parking and that the demand for parking and taking away parking. So we will definitely look at balancing the parking needs with other landscaping and other amenity zones out there. We would also look at, where the high demand areas for parking are, if there's certain parts of the corridor versus others that we can maintain the number of parking spaces to provide access to the local businesses in the area. There was another question about funding for the project and potential public-private ventures, and the city will be looking for funding opportunities beyond the design for the construction, and all possible funding sources will be explored, including grants and any potential public-private partnerships that may exist to obtain the funding. There was a question about kind of the process we're going through and whether or not we've already determined our design concepts and whether things are set in stone, and they aren't. That's why we're presenting these concepts currently to be able to get feedback on, so that as we get the feedback, we can move forward with accommodating, incorporating the feedback we're getting as we develop the design. So we are going through an iterative process with the public outreach. We met with stakeholders last week. This is a public meeting for anyone to provide feedback. We have the website to be able to address your comments, provide your questions, and we'll be collecting all this information to incorporate as much as we can in the project. And part of the phase we're in is what we call a design concept phase. And so we'll be developing some concepts and developing a report that will kind of set the stage for the next phase, which is the final design of the project. There was a question about painted areas and having, allowing for the retail dining areas on the public right-of-way, and also signals between the flashing lights that are out there and you know, full signals. So all of that will be looked at. As far as the public space for retail dining, I know the city has a program for parklets and pedlets where you can actually put facilities within the right-of-way to use for whether it's dining or other amenities in those areas. So there is a program for that currently within the city. And a question about, a comment about just making it more pedestrian friendly and attractive to visitors and that type of thing. And that's one of the purposes of the project, is not only to improve the infrastructure of dealing with drainage and the pavement and other infrastructure out there, but make it more attractive for pedestrians by providing wider sidewalks, curb bubble outs at the intersections to be able to make it easier for pedestrians to cross the street and slow traffic down. There was a comment about providing a full pedestrian mall, which would be close to traffic or a one-way flow along Beale Street. We haven't explored those options yet, but there is always an option that if the city would like to close the street down for different events, that could be done in the future to whether it's a street fair or any other kind of event like that. As far as one-way street, I don't know if the city is really wanting to entertain that at this point, but if they do, we'll definitely be looking at that. More questions about the outreach with stakeholders and the current plans for that. We had the meeting last week for stakeholders, and then as well as tonight's meeting. I'll be talking about follow-on meetings that we'll be having in next year also. So these are some of the comments we received, or some of the discussion at the last stakeholder meeting last week that we received. A lot of the same comments related to wayfinding, you know, bike facilities. We talked about the Green Valley Ranch project, kind of the native landscape features, trail connections. I didn't talk about this earlier, but low impact development, LID, to provide opportunities for water harvesting of the drainage into the landscape areas. We would be looking at that, as you have seen in our concepts. So I think, generally we got good support from the stakeholders that were attending last week. We received some good input on different amenities and features. Definitely the landscaping, adding some amenities, potential shade structures, that type of thing. Obviously, the ADA accessibility will be improving the sidewalk and ramps to be ADA accessible, meeting the current requirements. And we also talked about the theater renovation on 3rd and how that might tie into the improvements we're doing along the street frontage there. And I think that was about it. Jason, was there anything else that we should highlight in the discussion from last week?
No, just the general context was that there was a lot of support for the project. A lot of people felt this was highly needed and are excited about it. So we just wanted to continue our outreach to find further support in local champions.
So I guess I'll open it up to any additional questions right now. If there aren't additional questions, we can do a quick overview of the concepts that have been developed to date. So Annie, is there anybody with questions that you want to open up the mic to?
We do have one, sorry, too close. We do have one participant on the phone. Pat, did you have any additional comments or questions from since last week's meeting? Pat, we can't hear you.
Well, Dick, maybe you and Jason can kind of hit some of the highlights detailed on the concept plan, and then if Pat's able to connect, then we can definitely jump back to any questions that she may have. But maybe just, I know one thing of interest to, I think, a lot of the stakeholders down there anyway, was the amenity zones, and so maybe if you could just kind of hit some of the highlights that are depicted on the concept plan.
All right, I'll let Jason, you want to walk through the
Yeah,
general
certainly.
concept we have laid out?
So we have a very wide corridor today with the Beale Street project, and it goes from 1st through 6th. And one of the things we looked at was how we can economize the corridor, be more efficient with parking, maybe narrow the travel lanes for a little bit of traffic calming as well. With the narrowing and the traffic calming, we're able to gain some space that we can use for amenities and landscaping. So by narrowing the curbs, we're introducing amenity zones, which we're calling for things like bike racks, trash cans, wayfinding signage, benches and seating, programmable space functionality. And then as a buffer between the parking and this amenity zone, we look at a secondary zone for landscaping, kind of a dedicated space to provide shade for both vehicles and a lot of the pedestrian functionalities within the corridor. So by skinnying up the road a bit, we're able to introduce these added feature, added value spaces. Within the amenity zone, we haven't quite settled on what the bench is, what the bike rack is, what the pavements are, some of those surface treatments, but we've got some inspirational images to share a later part of this event. We haven't picked the number of trees and the location. The concept that you see in front of you is more kind of what will fit, what does not create a conflict with some of the existing structures or overhead canopies, where we have opportunities to locate these type of features are some of the things that we have currently in our graphic. We are looking at what we call bump outs for not only parking areas, but also intersection spaces. And these bump outs can be programmed to include the low impact development or the green infrastructure where we can water harvest and have micro retention basins for the benefit of the plant material. We can look at also enhanced crosswalks to help improve visibility as well as safety for pedestrians. Create intersection node opportunities as well for social spaces or perhaps art display, integrated wayfinding or other types of features as well. We're looking at improving the infrastructure of the lighting, both for the roadway as well as for the pedestrian zones. A mid-block crossing is something that will be new to the corridor, something to help cut down on jaywalking, give a dedicated space for a shorter distance to cross the road from north to south. Looking at electric charging stations as well as a new amenity that's not out there currently today. We do want to retain the diagonal parking. We found that that's one of the most efficient layouts. How we economize the space, we'll try to balance the existing parking count with what's out there today. There's some unique striping that's not really traditional that we're able to gain some spaces as we add planters without losing parking capacity. There's even the potential for parking bicycles in one of the spaces. Typically, you can get 10 bikes in a space that would handle one car. So it's an economic value as well for the business owners of the area. So with our new improvements, we look for inspirational images to help stimulate us of what we're talking about when we use certain terminology and what we could possibly emulate from other peer projects as well. So we've got a couple of boards following this plan view that illustrate where we've been inspired and what some of the features could be. This graphic is a 3D concept rendering of the plan view that you had seen to kind of give a little bit better perspective of scale and maybe some of the features. Again, these are more preliminary, so a lot of this is some initial ideas that can be refined. Things aren't necessarily yellows and greens and oranges and browns and things like that, but we'll work through that process as we get deeper into the design. Some of our materials that we talked about, things like the bump outs, we want to make sure that they're feasible, so we look to other communities that have these in place or other facilities that have been constructed and look to what's working, what's not working, and how we can adapt it to the Kingman climate and the Kingman conditions. Stamped crosswalks, concrete pavers, potentially having parking that has a pervious aspect to it, so we can maybe water harvest or cut down on urban heat island. Looking at wayfinding features and the different techniques that have been used successfully in other communities, whether they be standalone vertical signs or horizontal enhancements to pavements or dedicated attachments to existing infrastructure. Those are things that we'll consider as part of the project moving forward when we introduce these elements into the final design. Other features that we would look to be inspired by would be the character elements of the lighting, whether it's a certain type or a brand of light or certain structure, whether it could be solar powered, be augmented with light banners or other flags that can be attached to it for seasonal interest. Other things could be additional speakers to add sound as another spectrum to the community itself and how we program the corridor. We do have a pretty solid bench that's existing today within the corridor that can be customized to adopt a brand like the car culture or the railroad culture or Route 66 branding as part of it. There are other types of seating, but this is one that you've already got within your community that we can grow within the city itself to add continuity and consistency. Bike racks themselves, there are tons of different types of bike features and facilities, but we can explore which ones are most cost effective, which ones might fit best with the character that we propose, or maybe have dual purposes, such as maybe it's a bench and a bike rack, or it's a safety bollard and a bike rack. So there's lots of choices and alternatives to consider as part of the materials that we select eventually. Other things to consider for design elements would be litter receptacles or recycle bins. Again, a couple different styles, some that have caps on them, some that don't. Some are surface mount as well. Amenity zones can include the enhanced pavement to kind of separate circulation zones from more quiet zones or offline zones. Perhaps trees and tree grates as well to maximize surface area usability. Some of the planters themselves may have an integrated element like a seat wall or a seating opportunity. They can possibly be a raised planter as well. Different textures and pavement techniques to separate the different zones. Forward-facing benches with the flow of pedestrian traffic facing benches, or even benches that might face the roadway. We'll consider all these different positions as part of for refinement of our initial concept. Planters and on-street parking are other things that we would consider. Again, opening up the space for pedestrians and keeping the cyclists off the pedestrian environment and on the roadway environment are other techniques for bike placement in streetscape environments. We can also look at the different types of mid-block crossings. You know, perhaps it's a decorative stamped pavement or a different type of material or some kind of specialty treatment that alerts vehicles of unsignalized crossings for pedestrians. Safety features as well, like bollards, would be something to consider. With the electric charging stations, there's a lot of opportunity to add capacity. One thing to consider, technology always changes, so committing to one type of vendor might be something to consider. Maybe just looking at introducing the infrastructure at this point in time and adding capacity later on with different types of charging station features. Pavement types could be pavers, could be concrete, could be other decorative type pavements. Safety bollards can include lights if you wanted to enhance lighting and visibility within a pedestrian public space. One other feature that was part of our initial concept was having some type of a storytelling or cultural representation. We're looking for placemaking within our corridor as well. And one way to do that is to have a message embedded into some of the materials themselves. It can be a historical fact, it could be a local person of importance, or a local event that has a history message as part of it. Different techniques might be having things woven into the pavement itself or woven into a seating element or other type of decoration that would enhance the corridor as well. It just adds additional value to the community and helps define that sense of place.
Pat, I don't know if you're still on the line. Did you have any questions?
Pat sent an email, and she had, well, she just emailed me that she had emailed all the questions that she had.
Okay, well, we'll be replying to that email, so we'll try to answer all your questions. I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't ask the Vice Mayor if he had any comments or questions.
Thanks, Rob. Actually, we have seen, I think council has seen a lot of this presentation already. I am reminded, I like the mid-block crossing, for example, that you are incorporating this. My kids went to school in Lawrence, Kansas, and their downtown area has lots of mid-block crossings along their main street there, and it's a great idea. So there's a lot of good ideas here. So we're excited to see how it'll come out. Thanks.
All right, Dick, if you could take us through the next steps for the project and the schedule?
Yeah, so we're in December here, this stage of the project. We've had several different public meetings, stakeholder meetings. We will be having some follow-on ones in probably February and April and July as the design is developed at different stages. We'll be bringing more details back to the public and stakeholders. We're just finishing and we'll be wrapping up the design concept phase here shortly. And then as we get into the new year, we'll be moving into the more detailed design phase of the project. So here's the next steps. Obviously, we're here at the meeting tonight to get feedback, but there is ongoing opportunities to provide feedback through the project website. There's a link in there to send an email with your questions. So certainly visit the website. We will be updating it with new information as things are developed. And then, as I mentioned, we'll be having additional meetings in 2021 as we develop more details of the design. So with that, I think that's it. Appreciate everybody's involvement and participation in providing feedback to all of us, which helps us move the design forward.
Well, thank you, Dick. And just to reiterate, I would encourage everyone to visit the project website. If you have questions or comments, we're doing our best to try to respond to all those in a timely manner. So again, we appreciate your input. I know this is kind of a different public participation process with the pandemic, but we'll make every effort to involve the public in this process that we can. So we'll keep the project website updated, and please visit us and leave us any comments or questions. Thank you for your interest.